Hey friends, welcome back to the Nations Weekly podcast for the second of 4 special introductory conversations exploring the origin story and the values of nations. This week's podcast is called Origin Story Part 2, a film, a podcast, and a new direction. And this week's conversation, you'll join us to hear some of the backstory about how we followed the breadcrumbs to make our first feature-length documentary film, Iraq: Forgotten Hope, how we launched the podcast idea in the first place. And you'll hear the backstory about how myself, Stephen Elliott, and Claire all came to find ourselves a part of the Nations team here. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoyed this week's conversation. Set out to say okay, what do we do first? Let's make a magazine. So I'm just picturing this merry band of followers, kind of this funny little animated short of you guys all running around, figuring out, how do we make a magazine? And you guys make a great magazine. And at that point, that's probably actually when we first met. Cause that was probably 2015, 2016.
Yep.
Yeah. So, then I have this life-changing moment where I had moved down to Los Angeles to go to seminary and to get my master's at Fuller Theological Seminary. I was in the LA area for about 4 years and thought I was going to go back to the Northwest. And my family's there and I love it in all sorts of ways. And, when you're born in Washington in the rain, you're kind of raised to look down your nose a little bit at California. It's like, oh yeah, sunshine makes you happy. Rain builds character. Also seasonal affect disorder. So I end up actually we meet through a church. Yep. We both were, and still are in many ways, a part of North Coast Calvary Chapel here in Carlsbad. And I moved down to take a position as the director of production and communications, thinking I would be there for just probably a little bit before going back to the Northwest. And I've been in California for over 10 years now. And I met my wife here, and I now own a house in Oceanside. And I work here. So, spoiler alert, I didn't go back to the Northwest, but I initially meet you because the missions team over there, Mission and Community Impact, they have this crazy idea that instead of being this church that sends, missionaries, they no, let's find people who are embedded in their local communities, and that could be locally here, that can be globally, but who are the very sorts of people that nations exist to cover. They're these reformers, they're these passionate individuals who have been gripped by the gospel story, by Jesus, and who are doing amazing and creative things. And so Nations and Joel and the team fell into that category. So you guys became partners, and I was tasked with being the ambassador. So my job was to be friends with Joel and to just kind of keep an eye on hey, what's Nations doing?
Hear about all our financial woes.
Yeah, and then go back to the church and be dude, they're all eating beans. Can we just do an offering or something? And but then you got hoodwinked into being the college pastor there for a hot minute.
Yeah.
On a limited basis.
Well, the church up in the Seattle area is you went on sabbatical and never came home. And so, I felt this holy manipulation to at least close that chapter of my life as a college pastor. But no, actually that came about we went from the magazine to making a documentary film, which is kind of my department. So, we were tasked. This whole project came about between a few people at North Coast Calvary Chapel, Mark Foreman primarily, tasking Nations to go tell this story in Iraq. And I'm like, who are we to go to the Middle East and make any sense of what was going on over there during...
Clearly you're an expert.
Yeah, ISIS and all that stuff. And so anyways, I said, the only way we're going to make this documentary is if we turn Mark Foreman into an Anthony Bourdain type figure, to where the film is actually him exploring the conflict and trying to make sense of it himself. And so we did that. But while we were on we did 4 trips over there. So, I've logged so many hours of flight time with Mark. And what I didn't know I was in a job interview. He's like, what do you think about this for college ministry? I'm like, you don't need a college pastor. You need this and that. He's like, great. When do you start? And so then that's how, you and I met, is that we started this college ministry together. And
these are the college kids you were looking for. You will come here. So you're doing it like 10 hours a week or something. I'm working there full time, but I didn't know if the role I was in was the thing I wanted to do. And I was like, yeah, dude, like, I mean, there's something, you have a particular joie de vivre, doesn't he? Like,
unpack. What is that?
Joie de vivre. It's like a spirit of life. I mean, I think the French.
Oh, stop it.
I mean, I think it is. I didn't study French. I just know that phrase. It's a cool one to say, you know, and France is playing and hopefully losing to Morocco right now in the World Cup. But so you're just he's a charismatic figure. Like he's a bit of a magnet. He's a story magnet. He's a person's magnet. Don't let any of this go to your head. You're handsome and you're but so we start this college service together, and I think that's my intro to Nations. I'm hanging out. I'm starting to see what's up here. I'm like, man, this is amazing. They start, so we make this documentary, Iraq, A Forgotten Hope, about a bunch of just different beautiful and heartbreaking stories about what God was doing in that region at a particular time. And that was its own new problem to solve, right? So from sabbatical to emerging vision to magazine to, okay, next thing, once again, little animation, you know, the creative team runs over and is like, the problem of making a feature-length documentary in a place that we know nothing about. All right, cool. We're equipped with cameras and curiosity. So we head over there and in good faith try and tell like some of the honest stories that we find there. Come back, and then, as is fitting with Nations, we're sitting around being like, and at this point I actually think I was sitting around in some of the staff meetings.
Yep.
And I hear everybody being like, let's make a podcast. And I'm like, yes, I love podcasts. Like, I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm a nerd. And so you guys are describing stuff. And I remember saying very explicitly, all right, guys, I actually had just been working on pitching a podcast at the church. And I was like, here's my 2 cents. What you should absolutely not do is make a really cool, beautiful podcast, put a lot of energy into like, you know, launching it and getting people on board, like record one episode and then have it be crickets. Like you should record a bunch of episodes over a course of time and then release them as a season, or you should set it up so that you know that you can do something on a weekly basis. And Joel's like, yeah, for sure. Over the shoulder with the advice. And so then we made the Nations podcast as it has existed, which is what? Like, what is it? It's kind of been this Nations present.
Well, Joseph, like, you're always right. Number one, you are right.
How do you feel about this?
I love
first iteration of the podcast, Joseph.
Right.
And number two, just like everything else in our storied history, it's been about figuring it out, and and so my heartbeat from day one is like, I don't want to do this if we can't do it to the best of our ability, and to do it at a level that honors the people who we're talking about. So just having a magazine like every other magazine you get from nonprofits that just goes, cool, I'll recycle this for you, and you know, it's printed on cheap paper. We weren't going to do that. We were going to use the best photographers in the world. We're going to try to get the best storytellers in the world to tell the stories of this, unbelievably, the stories that aren't being told. And so that's been, you know, we're still tweaking, we're still figuring out that. And so same with the filmmaking component to it. It's like, I know how to make action sports films, but I don't know how to make documentary. So it was a ton of research, and it took a lot of work to just get a presentable documentary from, you know, Iraq and the other short projects we've done. And the same with the podcast. I was like, man, there's just every single person has a podcast. It's like, dude, my nephew has a podcast. His dog has a podcast. Everybody has a podcast. So why though? So we had to figure out creating a space where the people that we were featuring in the journal and the magazines we could actually go deeper into the stories and get, you know, because I would go on assignment and I'd be like, oh my gosh, have you met this guy? He's incredible. And all the stories that were told. And then what gets printed in the journal is a condensed, poetic version of that. And so I wanted space to figure that out. And so it wasn't that I would do a podcast every week if we could, but now what's cool is that Nations is ready to have that weekly podcast, and we'll continue with the long form interviews, and how the intertwines with our weekly podcast. We'll sort that out, but it's doing it right.
Well, and but I love what you're talking about here. You're talking about some of the standards, and we're going to have later on in the conversation, as I mentioned, we're going to spend a little time unpacking some of the guiding values that establish a baseline for our identity as like a creative kind of movement and as a company. And I hear you articulating some of that. This is value for excellence, which isn't one of the explicit named ones that we'll go into a little bit later, but it is very much like a core value of ours, which is, hey, let's not cheapen things. Let's not cut corners. The stories and the individuals they're incredible. So they deserve to be honored with the best that we can offer. But a little caveat is that at this stage of Nations, it was this mom and pop nonprofit. So like everything was done on a shoestring budget. People were donating their time in all sorts of ways. And so I realize now, when I think back to the particularly arrogant version of Joseph that was in that story, who just knew exactly what you should and shouldn't do with the podcast. Yeah, part of it came down to resourcing. Is that people, like, Nations has existed for as long as it has because people are captured by the vision and by its unfolding story, your unfolding story, Brianna's, Annalise's, Greg's, like all the different writers, it's been this cool emergent network, and people are captivated by it and have been like, hey, we'll give you money to go do this to the glory of God and to do it well, to create cultural artifacts that are beautiful and are worth keeping, not just tossing, worth keeping on a shelf, worth giving away as gifts. And that's something that's really beautiful. But that kind of brings us in some ways to a next really important chapter in the Nation's story, which is this handsome man full of gravitas sitting across from me, Stephen Elliott. And
Stephen Vincent.
Stephen Vincent.
Thank you.
Named after Vince Lombardi, Elliott. So you mentioned, if you want to hear more about Stephen's story and you're a subscriber or you're a member of the Nations platform, you can actually go back and see one of those Figuring It Out podcasts.
Episode 1.
Oh, episode 1?
The very first. Actually, it was filmed in Washington. It's the one that looks different from all the other ones. We
Downtown Puyallup.
Downtown Puyallup, Washington.
Do the Puyallup. Little cookie for anybody from the Northwest. So what time, when on the timeline, and how did you end up meeting Joel? And then we'll get into a little bit of how you came to be hoodwinked into being our CEO.
Yeah. So from Kansas originally, went to school. I'm not going to give you the whole backstory, but just the couple of brief points. Yeah. Got my business degree at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa. And then after I graduated there in 2003, I spent 4 years on active duty in the Army. Got out in 2007. And being stationed at Fort Lewis, JBLM as it's now called, was what brought me to the Puget Sound in the first place. And then when I got out in 2007, my wife, Brooke, and I decided to stick around. And so we were living in Olympia, and I was working as a financial advisor, wealth manager. That was my job. And I had known this guy named Ryan Frederick and his wife, Selena. Actually, we met them before they were even married. I think they were about 14. I don't know how old they were. They were very young. But I met them when I was just first stationed at Fort Lewis, and kept connection with him over the years. And then one day, quite literally, it was literally this random, out of the blue, Ryan called me, which wasn't unusual necessarily, but I didn't see him all that often, talk to him all that often. But he called me and said, "Hey, there's this thing called Nations, and we're looking for a treasurer for the board, and wondering if you would be interested." I was like, "Nations? What is that?" And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, "It's we tell stories. It's slow media." He said, "I'll send you some journals, and you can kind of take a look at it." And I remember getting copies, I think probably the first few volumes of the Nation's Journal. And I remember it was a really strange kind of emotional experience when I got it, because there was part of me that was just a little bit annoyed. Not that I should know or I am in the know on all things media or content. I'm not. But when I'm looking at this stuff, I'm just like, how have I never heard of this? Mm-hmm. And Ryan, how have you how have you never even mentioned this to me, right? And then just being, on the one hand, really moved by it, but then not being able to, I could not at that time name why. Mm-hmm. It was just like, I couldn't sit here and say, oh, well, this is really compelling to me for, these 3 reasons. It just sort of just hit me. I couldn't really describe it. And so anyway, joined the board. This was probably around 2017 timeframe, and kind of just joined the journey to kind of figure out, what is this, and understand, what are we doing at that time. Joel was wrapping up the Iraq doc, so that was kind of an interesting turning point, I guess, or at least growth point for Four Nations. And I remember being in the first board retreat that I participated in as a board member, and Joel showing us the initial cut of Iraq: A Forgotten Hope. And I just remember, we all sat there, watched it, and then there was just this sort of silence, and Joel's kind of like,
say something, please.
Sort of anything. Trying to read the room. And I think we were all, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I know for myself, it was just so overwhelmed with just what I just saw, the beauty of it. And so, really felt that this is something very special, and not from the sense of, money or a sense of fame or any of that, but just saying the quality of what's happening here, more people need this. More people need to be told effectively the gospel story through the lens of other people that are responding to the gospel story. That's effectively what it is, yeah. Right? And so that was how I got involved, first with Nations, was Ryan Frederick. It's all his fault. So.
Well, I would say Ryan gets a strike against him for having been on the board and known about Nations for a long time and never told you about it. Yes. But then he totally redeems himself. By recruiting you to be the treasurer. So thanks, Ryan.
Yes.
Ryan and Selena have the Fierce Marriage podcast, and they were busy launching that at the time.
Yeah, that's right. They had a lot going on.
Wildly popular.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're in 2017, 2018, and I think the next one thing that we forgot to mention was, all right, so we created the magazine, we created the doc, the online magazine and website. That was another aspect that we realized was key to becoming a platform, saying well, hey, you got to have some place to host the film. You got to have some place to, we're only putting out one journal a year at this point, but that's not really going to build that much of a platform or a following. And also there's just more stories to be told. And if we're going to keep developing as a creative community, our craft, our storytelling, the network of writers and of story subjects, then we need to be doing this in a more disciplined way. And so there's a couple in those intervening years too, Brianna Lance and Annalise Jolly, who've kind of formally headed up editorial and wrote for us, two incredible women, two of my favorite women, who were both just wonderfully courageous, fascinating, and interesting people in their own right, but who did so much to shape kind of the vision and the voice and the values of editorial. And so we're always incredibly indebted to them. And secretly, and not so secretly, I have recently been pitching both of them hey, will you write for Nations again? We're resourced now. We can, we resourced it in a way that we weren't before. So please come back and write for us. Unashamed pitch that I'm making right there. But so that kind of catches us up to close to what we'd looked like before. But then I start learning slowly through you that there's a conversation that's brewing at the board level, that hey, Nations feels like it's at a little bit of maybe a turning point. As I'd mentioned, at this point, we're just this mom and pop nonprofit. We'd never spent any money on marketing. So we hadn't, we just were everybody else, Instagram account, Facebook, email newsletter or whatnot, but really hadn't been doing much to try and broadcast, just been trying to focus on the craft. But similarly, hadn't really been focusing a ton on trying to grow the organization and its resources resources to try and resource the creative community. And so some of that, once again, the problem of, hey, there's too many good stories to tell, but that takes time, that takes money, that takes sending people places, that takes, if we want to honor the story subjects well, we also want to honor the artists who are doing it. And like you mentioned, I love Russell's response to it, because that's been the response that so many of us have had when we've encountered nations and kind of what God is doing in and through it in its various artistic mediums is, hey, I love this. I want to support, I'll share it with people, but also, yeah, cool. Like I want to contribute, I'll offer my time or my talents. I'll write for you guys at a rate that, I've had writers write for me in the years that I've been here who get paid way more at other places. And they're like, oh, hey, no, like it's fine. I want to, consider like this my contribution. Yeah. And while we appreciated that always also didn't kind of sit well, because we're like, hey, if we're about honoring the story, if we're about creating beautiful art, like that's an element of it too, is honoring the artists and their craft and creating not just a good paycheck, but also like just an environment where they understand that craft is valued deeply. And I think that you are some of the catalyst for this conversation at the board level of asking the question of, hey, well, is the future of nations best served by it being like a nonprofit, or does it need to grow and change?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I don't think being a nonprofit or for-profit, that's not a mission statement. That's a tax designation within the IRS code, right? That's what it is, right? That's all we're talking about. So every organization, every family unit, you could look at as a business. It has, right, there's resources that are required, and some of those resources include financial resources. And so we should always be asking the question, are we stewarding that which we have the best that we can? And is the structure within which that stewardship happens, is that optimal, right? And sometimes structures that serve you in the past don't necessarily serve you forever, and you have to rethink that. And so for me, what I think there was a tremendous amount of grace in nations for so many years, being able to iterate to some degree pretty silently, like without a lot of fanfare. I think Joel, you could speak to that more than I could, but I think there's a lot of benefit to that in terms of not having that external pressure that can come with more notoriety or more resources when you don't quite know maybe who you are yet. And so for me, the question was, well, if we have this products that we're producing, we have art that we're curating, and in order to curate that art, Joel in particular has to go and spend valuable time and basically ask for money to be able to curate that art, which is great. But it's just like, well, what if we just sort of called it what it is and said, this is a subscription. It takes financial resources to produce that content. And if you would like the content, then you pay for the content. And then what if then there's another nonprofit component that can then do something completely different that isn't just soliciting donations to produce media? What if that nonprofit then can be in a position to receive donations and actually invest financial resources, donate financial resources into the lives and ministries of reformers whose stories we tell? Because that's one of the things that happens as we're telling stories is we learn a lot. We learn a lot about these places and ecosystems. And so it seemed like, well, what if we just properly, instead of having to stop and refuel, all the time to keep this ship or this plane, going, what if we just resourced it, as well as we can to start, and really give ourselves the best chance of success to honor the stories and honor the content. And so that was sort of a journey within the board. My family in late 2019, my wife and I really felt that our time in the Puget Sound was drawing to a close. We didn't really know why. Yes, we were very tired of the rain. That was certainly part of it. There's no question. And we came down to visit it January of 2020. Didn't really know the Parkers well. Hung out with them a little bit and a couple other folks, but they were basically, you and Rachel were really the only people we knew in San Diego County. And yeah, we left that trip. We're like, yeah, we're moving down here. And then this thing called COVID happened in March of 2020. And we just felt like, you know what, until a door slams in our face that says you can't you can't do this, then we're going to just kind of keep marching towards that. I was running a company that I had founded. I was about 4 or 5 years into it. So that was its own kind of thing of like, I could not have imagined not doing that at that time, because it was just really starting to grow and take off, and there was no off ramp from that work for me. But as soon as we got down here, some of the first, I think, because you guys were about the only people we knew, and we invited you guys over for dinner, and you and I were chatting, and you shared with me, you're just like, I feel like I really need a CEO. And I'm not even entirely sure what you meant by that. I think kind of what you meant was I need help on the business side, right? It wasn't like, hey, here's my strategic plan for what nations look like. You were just sort of saying, I need help. Like that's kind of how I took it. When you said that, my immediate like visceral reaction was, I want that job. And I don't even know what the job was. And it would make no sense for me to want that job, because I have never run a media company or, done any of that. But part of the background for me that was happening, partly through, my journey and my family's journey, as well, was really coming alive to the power of story, is really seeing, in my own life, a story that, I never thought I would tell, that I actively sought to keep in the dark, began to be used in a way that connected people. It did things that were, indescribable to me. It was incredible to me. Yeah. And so for me, here I am, running a financial services company, doing good work, which was fine, but it was work that was not satisfying. It was like, gosh, if I could take whatever business acumen that I have and apply that to help artists tell stories that I feel like, inspire me and need to be told, then I would love to spend my time that way. And so we kind of spent, Joel and I spent a good chunk of COVID after we moved down here, just kind of thinking and dreaming and what-ifing. And, fast forward to 2022, and the company that I was running was sold, and we've brought investors on board who've graciously partnered with us because they believe in the mission that is Nations, and they believe in what we're doing. And so now we have this thing that is Nations Media. That's a for-profit subscription-based media platform. And then we have this nonprofit called Stardust International that is now in a position to be able to receive donations and sow financial resources back into the lives and ministries of those reformers. So that's kind of where we're at. And for me, I think the last thing I would say, because I was thinking a lot about this before, this conversation, was just like, why am I here? And you could say, well, because, somebody has to deal with lawyers and CPAs and, investors and all that.
And we're so grateful that people like you exist.
Yeah. Well, it goes both ways, because it's a joy to be able to have something that is as compelling to me to be able to apply myself towards. But for me, like when I think about it and what I think Nations, can be, which I think that will be for as long as Nations is a thing, I think we will always be asking that question. It's a question that never fully has an answer. And if we feel like we fully answered it, then that's probably the time that we should pack up and go do something else, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, I was thinking a lot about this. It was just like, what is it that draws me to this brand, these stories, this project? And I think for me, it's basically 2 words. It's politics and religion. And what I mean by that is...
Dangerous words, man.
Yes. So Nations, if you hear nothing else, Nations is all about politics and religion.
No.
So, I mean, we've all had our own ups and downs in life and our own faith journeys, and I certainly have as well. And continue on that. I haven't fully worked out all the aspects of my faith and my belief and my theology and all those things. But, I think I find myself at a place increasingly of hopelessness as I look at the systems of the world that man has built that are easy to find hope and identity in. And it's not that those systems are even, some of them are evil, some of them aren't, but none of them are worthy of my ultimate and total allegiance.
Yeah.
Whether that is a business entity, besides my family, which is that's a wonderful, life-giving, part of my life that I don't deserve. But we live in a world right now where a lot of things are crumbling, and a lot of things are, at the very least, being stressed, if not kind of falling apart before our eyes. And so for me, the question that I'm asking from a political standpoint is really the question of, what does it mean to be, first and foremost, a citizen of the kingdom of heaven? If that is a political reality, if Jesus actually was who he said he was, and if he actually came, and if that's true, then that's pretty radical. And that's beyond just what I do for a few hours on a Sunday, or it's beyond what kind of music I listen to or books that I read. And I know that myself, again, there's things that I would say that I believe, but then how I act reveals that there's a gap.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, part of Nations is really being around people that are exploring that question in some form or fashion, but specifically people who are actually taking risk, and who seem to be living in such a way that kingdom reality supersedes war. It supersedes other political systems. It supersedes other schisms and other divides within Jesus' church. And I want to be around those people because I want more of that.
Yeah.
I want to figure out how to live into that more fully. So for me, it's about, in some respects, it's about politics. And then from another respect, it's about religion, meaning, what am I worshiping?
Yeah.
What are the things that with my time and with my energy, I'm giving myself to that maybe I shouldn't be? And again, being around people and being around stories of people who are being the hands and feet of Jesus, who are oriented around service. They're oriented around self-sacrifice. They're oriented around meeting the needs of others before they are concerned about meeting the needs of themselves. So that's why I'm here, is really to ask those questions and be around people who, not that they have the answers, but I think they have a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom that I need, and I think probably others need as well.
Geez, well, so we talked about politics and we talked about religion now. So do you just want to round it out and talk about sex and the economy or money as well? You just get all the big ones out of the way? No, I think what I hear you saying in some ways is that one, as an organization, we're just trying to grow and adapt and to figure out structurally, like how do we best serve the mission that we feel like we've been entrusted with, which is, as you mentioned, to curate, to discover voices worthy to be heard, to unearth and to shine a spotlight on the people and on the communities that are living out like an ethic, a transcendent kind of wildly creative, subversive, reformer, revolutionary, like ethic that is challenging in many ways a lot of these established norms or structures that aren't completely captured or captivated by a particular political ideology or a particular view on, how you should structure the economy or on morality or on spirituality. But there's this, there's a few core things that unite and ignite those people to be building communities and movements and art and film and all sorts of stuff that isn't about like putting up walls between us and other people, isn't about division. It isn't about fear mongering. It isn't about just making a quick buck. It isn't about just self-indulgent hedonism. It's a different type of story. It's a fundamentally, in a lot of ways, different posture towards participating in reality. And one, it is participatory. It's not just consumptive, right? And it is other-centric. It isn't self-centered.
No.
It is postured towards being creative rather than destructive. It recognizes that there's valuable things in the past that we need to honor, that we need to carry into the future, that are worth preserving, that are worth like reflecting on and studying, that need to be part of our shared story going forward. And there are undiscovered things in the future that we need to grab and to bring into the present now. It is, I mean, if I'm doing a decent job, that's the sort of people, that's the movement that we are feeling ourselves pulled into, and that we want to try and invite everybody, our listeners, our viewers, our readers, like invite people into, hey, there's something that's going on here, and it will probably never be mainstream, right? It will never be crushing the box office. It will never be like the coolest thing to be a part of, in part because it doesn't shy away from brokenness. It doesn't shy away from suffering. It seeks to integrate those and to honor those in particular ways and creative ways. But like you said, ultimately, it's not about us. It's not about building up the petty kingdoms that we all have and the vision of the good life that is, that's been sold to us by the various political ideologies and experiments throughout history, by the various economic structures, by the various religious institutions, and saying not that any of and all of those things are like bad in and of themselves, but many of them, as you mentioned, they've been corrupted or they're eroding. And so I think you talk to anybody and you look at the state of media right now, you look at the state of the world, and it's easy to be nihilistic. It's easy to be cynical and apathetic. It's easy to believe that like, well, hey, we just need to circle the wagons and ride out the storm and take care of me and mine and, not risk. Not risk being hopeful. That's just naive. Not risk, being willing to sacrifice for a stranger. Like that's just foolhardy, but to risk stepping into something that you can't fully trust because it's emerging. We don't know what it is.
Yeah.
That's exciting and it's a terrifying prospect. But I agree that, I mean, you articulated well. You're interested and you gravitate towards people who are doing that. I do as well. They're the people that make me go, hey, I'm hopeful and I'm interested to see like what the future holds, not because there won't be great hardship, not because there won't be great challenge, and the complexities of our globalized world are like, they're so far beyond me.
Yeah.
But time and time again, that's what I love about the gospel story, is that when you see it take root in people and in communities, ultimately what ends up happening is something new that breeds new life, that transcends the expected and invites us to join in that. And we're here to give witness to it. And I think that is moving us towards a conversation about, we already have started talking about values. So thanks for, I'll pay you later for teeing us up. But before we do that, our silent conversation partner thus far, Claire, quiet Claire, not quiet because you don't have much to offer, but because in many ways,
she's literally been on the job for 2 weeks and now she's at the podcast.
Yeah, this is week 3.
Midweek, week 3.
Veteran.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Claire, speak to us about our values as you understand them.
Oh gosh.
Well, more so, I'm just curious about how and I know everybody else is. We're joking, but we're not joking because you actually literally have been here for only 3 weeks. And once again, Nations is a story of following the breadcrumbs and solving the next problem. And your position is part of that process, because we go, okay, cool. I signed on to somehow like oversee editorial. Joel's making films. Steven's handling business. And we're like, well, how are people going to find out about us? Especially people that don't already know about us. And enter Claire, because we partnered with Soul Heart, a wonderful organization who's kind of marketing experts in different ways. And they're like, yeah, you need to have somebody who's going to work with us, who's going to help, and it's going to help take a lot of the stories that you guys have captured and the ones that you will be, and just the life of the organization, and in some ways bring that expression online, beyond just publishing our stories to the website, but, through different social media platforms and through, other creative digital avenues,
TBD.
like TBD. Okay. So it doesn't have to be your full life story or anything. but a little bit of like, okay, you're new to the nation's journey. Like, why did you say yes to the job? You know, like, how'd you get here?
I followed some breadcrumbs. I have a background working with nonprofits. Was part of founding a nonprofit in Germany for the last number of years. My entire 20s, most of my adult life was lived overseas. End of 2019, ended up back in Los Angeles where I was raised, doing a visa reset. I had to be out of Europe for 90 days. Right at the end of those 90 days was the pandemic. So it perfectly coincided, like the few weeks I was supposed to be going back.
No way.
The world shut down, and Germany also, stopped like processing visa paperwork. So there was,
But of course,
no chance. Yeah. So I fought and I wrestled for a number of years about, okay, do I need to find a different way back to Germany? Am I going to just wait this out? This can't last forever. I was even like a group of people doing advocacy to parliaments of various governments to open the borders so that people who had been living there could
I didn't know that
go
part.
back and be a part. Yeah, I was like, spent the summer of 2020 like writing different offices in German parliament because I was kind of desperate. But slowly but surely throughout 2021 and this past year of 2022, really leaning into, okay, my life is definitely taking a pivot, and I made the decision to relocate completely back to California. So I've just been really asking God, okay, like what is happening? Applied to grad school, got in up in Seattle, and then shortly in that same time span, I got a call from Joseph about a potential job at Nations. And we talked about it, and we were like, okay, does this fit? Is this something that you even want to do?
I think on the phone I was like, okay, I've been tasked with trying to find this person, and I don't know, like you're smart and interesting, and there's no way that you would be interested in or have any background or related experience to this. And it was pretty hilarious. You listened quietly, and then you're like, yeah, well, actually, you'd be wrong. And I was like, what? The plot thickens.
So there was actually quite a lot of overlap between my experience with working in creative communities with artists, being a creative myself, different international initiatives that I had been partnering with, working in different parts of Asia and East Africa, different parts of Europe. And I think it was just even confirmed during my interview. There was so much overlap. There was such a deep commonality that I hadn't, but parts of me that had been dormant the past few years, I really felt come to life when I came to even just interview. And it was really cool. I was like, okay, this is tapping into something that is awesome and that I can kind of dig into and live in. And so, yeah, I'm up for this really exciting challenge. It's interesting because I'm not a social media junkie. I'm not an influencer by any means, especially online.
You've influenced us, Claire.
Thank you. So, just trying to build out this department and get the job done.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun so far.
What was the, you mentioned that you co-founded a nonprofit during your years in Germany. What was it centered around? What sort of work did you guys do?
So we worked with marginalized communities that were often at risk for exploitation, and also centered around red light districts.
Jeez.
So people working who were in and or affected by prostitution and sex work.
Super light work.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm sure that you've got stories that I hope some of them will, if appropriate, will make their way onto the pages of Nations. But yeah, we all kind of unanimously, when we sat down with you, we're just like, yeah, you're it. You're part of the tribe. You can figure out the job.
I don't even think she made it to her car. When we called her.
Yeah, I think
I
actually
was leaving the steady state parking lot.
Yeah,
Shout out to steady
I think
state.
you walked out and came and obviously I'd known you. We were friends from before, and so a little bit of word of well, I'm too close to see this. What do you guys think? And I think Steven, you were like, yeah, she's brilliant. We have to hire her. And Joel's like, God, yes. Well, so that kind of brings us to here. I mentioned we're building in the office. We're trying to build a company. We do have some new needs. I know your team has some needs with regard to what is the working name inside a froth puppy?
We need a froth puppy. We're searching in search of a nation's froth puppy.
Yes, and what that actually means is like a content creator for the different social media
Someone
platforms.
who's highly excitable and
Passionate.
passionate.
Yeah,
We have all the things.
Wait, we have it up on the board.
Yeah.
Their ambassador. So TikTok, content curation, Insta Reels, young, fun, personality, excited, well-spoken, fun, but with three exclamation points. So if that's you, you can email Steven@nations.co.
I think Claire at
Yeah.
Lawrence.co.
Claire@nations.co.
Yeah.
Stephen will forward that email.
Stephen will forward that, because you know what? Sometimes that's what business is, isn't it? Forwarding emails.
Application.
Because that's one of the hard things is like social media is so important. It's also, it's so funny. Like who here likes social media? Like no one. We're like, it sucks all of our time. We hate it.
Really
but we're
weird
all
space.
on it. And that's where we get all of our information. So although we'd like to think that we'd all get our information from beautiful curated journals and magazines, the reality is so many people, all of us, we get information. So how do you live in that tension of getting this froth puppy who's going to be highly excitable and on all the TikTok trends, but also telling the stories that, also deserve to be in the journal, and that what's going through your mind in this impossible task, Claire?
I feel like it's impossible, but also not, because we all know those types of people who love nations, who can really get behind us and do a really good job of getting other people excited and bringing other people into the community. I think for me, that's a huge part of why I'm a consumer on social media with some things, is being part of a community, is staying informed, is getting content because when you consume content, you're investing your time. Like that's just it. You're investing into the people that you're viewing, whether you want to or not. And so I think that's how I try to view social media is, okay, if I'm going to follow someone, who am I investing my time into? What am I informing myself with? What kind of material and content? And so I think, we just have to find that special person who's capable of that. And also it's an important piece for us too, because we need to stay authentic to who we are. Nations isn't like throwing up trends on TikTok. Not typically.
Although Joseph, we did see Joseph dance.
Actually,
that could be.
Thinking of it,
That's some
Joseph.
great content.
Let's talk after.
Just frothing to be on
so
TikTok
Straight to the
Reels.
Communist Party in China.
Yeah, I think it's part of holding that tension of staying authentic to who we are as a brand and not selling our souls to what everyone is doing, but also getting under and maintaining under the good graces, staying under the good graces of the algorithm to help build our business and reach more people. So it's kind of a double-edged sword that we have to kind of tap into and figure out as much as we're comfortable with engaging with it.
Yeah.
Well, it requires discernment, and this uneasy alliance with, hey, there are these technologies, there are these systems. Back to our conversation, about political systems or religious ones or economic ones. Like, hey, we don't have ultimate power to construct the world, and if we were given it, we surely would mess it up in some different ways. So we're all part of this kind of grand experiment. There's no unplugging the internet. There's no, reversing globalism in lots of different ways. So the path forward for Christians, for me as a Christian, for like the movement of Jesus followers around the world, is really this one of discernment. Of saying, hey, in any given context and situation, whatever country you're part of, whatever culture you're part of, whatever technologies you engage with, okay, we want to do it thoughtfully, do it guided by a couple of different values. And values, I think, actually is a little bit of what I'm hearing you say, Claire, saying, hey, there is a way for us to be nations. And we had to become a platform, just like we had to become a website, we had to become a magazine, we had to become a filmmaking company, we had to become a podcast. It's like, well, we have to become a part of the social media ecosystem, but there's ways to do that are like that don't compromise our values.
I'm just curious, do you recall your first impression of Nations? And if so, or if not even, what were the things that drew you to Nations content?
My first interaction with Nations was actually when I was living in Germany, like in the mid 2010s, maybe 2017. Being is that the content appealed to a lot of the people in my immediate sphere. I had seen it pop up here and there, but I don't remember like fully engaging with it. But I think it's that like common thread that kind of helped lead me here in a way. Because it's the same, it's very similar.
Yeah.
But when I was really doing a deep dive into the content to prep for my interview in all transparency.
Yeah. We welcome transparency.
Yeah. Thank you. I just found it very compelling and very hopeful and life-giving, and I valued how different it was from a lot of the different types of content that it could be pinned against, but it wasn't. And I really liked the individuality that I found through Nations.
That's awesome.
Can we put that testimony on the website?
Sure. I'll add it to the bank I'm making.
Yeah.
I'll type it up.
Just use Lynn Marie.
Perfect.
No one will know it's you.
No.